The stagecoach lurched to a halt outside the dusty general store in Boise, Idaho territory, and Caroline Andrews pressed her gloved hand against the window, watching a tall cowboy lean against the hitching post with the stillness of a man who had nowhere else to be. It was September 1882, and she had traveled over 2,000 miles to marry a stranger, carrying nothing but a worn carpet bag and a secret that wrapped around her tongue like barbed wire every time she tried to speak. The driver opened the door and offered his hand, but Caroline hesitated, her heart pounding so hard she thought it might break through her ribs. She had written to Quinton Norris 3 times, her letters carefully composed over hours, each word chosen with precision, because writing allowed her the luxury of time that speaking never did. In her letters, she had been eloquent, thoughtful, even witty. She had told him about her love of books, her skill with a needle, and her dreams of building a life out west. What she had not told him was that when she opened her mouth to speak, words sometimes tangled themselves into knots that could take minutes to unravel. The driver cleared his throat and Caroline forced herself to move. Her boots touched the packed earth of Main Street, and dust rose around her skirts. The afternoon sun beat down mercilessly, and she could feel sweat gathering beneath her high collar despite the cooling September air. She smoothed her gray traveling dress and looked around for the man whose photograph she had studied 100 times by candlelight. In the small tintype he had sent, he had looked serious and handsome, with dark hair and eyes that seemed kind even in the grainy image. "Miss Andrews." The voice came from behind her, low and careful, as if the speaker was afraid of startling a wild animal. Caroline turned and found herself looking up into the face from the photograph, though the reality was more striking than any image could capture. Quinton Norris stood at least 6 feet tall, with broad shoulders that spoke of hard work and a lean frame that suggested he did not waste much on creature comforts. His dark hair was longer than in the photograph, curling slightly at his collar, and his eyes were not just brown but a deep amber that caught the sunlight. He held his hat in his hands, turning it slowly, and something about the gesture told her he was as nervous as she was. Why, yes, she managed, and there it was, the betrayal of her tongue on the very first word. She watched his face for the flicker of disappointment or disgust she had seen so many times before, but his expression did not change. "I am C.C. Caroline. Pleased to meet you, Caroline." He said her name slowly, respectfully, and made no move to rush her or finish her sentence. "I am Quinton. I hope your journey was not too difficult." She wanted to tell him about the endless days of rattling trains and bouncing stage coaches, about the kind woman in St. Louis who had shared her lunch, about the terrifying river crossing where she had been certain they would all drown. Instead, she nodded and tried again. "It was long, but I am glad to be here." The words felt like pulling teeth, each one catching before it could emerge. She saw him watching her mouth, but not with impatience, only with attention, as if he wanted to make sure he heard every word correctly. "Let me take your bag," he said, reaching for her carpet bag. His hand brushed hers, and she noticed his fingers were calloused but his touch was gentle. "The preacher is expecting us at 4 o'clock, which gives us about an hour. I thought maybe you would like to freshen up first. Mrs. Patterson runs the boarding house, and she has a room ready for you." Caroline felt a wave of gratitude that nearly brought tears to her eyes. He had thought ahead, planned for her comfort, given her time to prepare. She had heard stories of mail-order brides married within minutes of stepping off the stage, still covered in travel dust and exhausted beyond measure. She nodded, not trusting her voice. Quinton led her down the wooden sidewalk, past the saloon where tinny piano music drifted through the swinging doors, past the land office and the assayer's shop, to a neat two-story house with white trim and flower boxes in the windows. He knocked gently, and a plump woman with gray hair and a warm smile opened the door. "Oh, you must be Miss Andrews. Come in, come in. You poor dear, you must be absolutely exhausted." Mrs. Patterson ushered her inside, chattering constantly in a way that required no response, which Caroline appreciated more than the woman could know. "Quinton, you wait down here. Miss Andrews needs a proper bath and time to rest before any wedding. I will bring her down when she is ready." The next hour passed in a blur of hot water and lavender soap, of Mrs. Patterson's gentle hands helping her wash the grime of travel from her skin and hair, of sitting by the window in a soft robe while the older woman combed through her long blonde hair until it dried in waves down her back. Mrs. Patterson talked the entire time, sharing gossip about the town, praising Quinton as one of the finest men in the territory, and carefully not mentioning Caroline Stutter at all. "Now, Mrs. Patterson said, opening the small trunk that had been delivered earlier with Caroline's other belongings, "let us see what you brought to wear. A bride should look her best." Caroline had only one good dress, a blue cotton with white lace at the collar and cuffs. Her mother had made it 2 years ago, before the fever had taken both her parents within a week of each other. She had sold almost everything else to pay for her passage west and to settle the debts her father had left behind. The dress was not fancy, but it was clean and well made, and when she put it on, she felt more like herself than she had in days. Mrs. Patterson pinned up her hair, leaving a few curls loose to frame her face, and then stood back to admire her work. "You are a lovely girl. Quinton is a lucky man." Caroline looked at herself in the small mirror and barely recognized the young woman staring back. At 21, she had thought her chance at marriage had passed. Back in Boston, men had shown interest until they heard her speak, and then they had made excuses and disappeared. Her stutter had grown worse after her parents died, as if grief had tied her tongue into even tighter knots. The orphanage matron who had taken her in had been kind but practical. "You need a husband," she had said, "and out west men are less particular. Answer one of these advertisements." She had spread a newspaper before Caroline, her finger pointing to a column of men seeking wives. Caroline had written to 3 men. Only Quinton had responded. His letter had been brief but courteous, explaining that he had a ranch 10 miles outside of Boise, that he was 26 years old, and that he was looking for a wife who wanted to build a life together. He had not asked for a photograph, had not listed requirements about her appearance or accomplishments. He had only asked if she was willing to work hard and if she wanted children someday. She had written back yes to both questions. Now, descending the stairs at Mrs. Patterson's boarding house, she saw him waiting in the parlor. He had changed into a clean white shirt and black vest, and his hair was still damp, as if he too had taken time to wash. He looked up when she entered, and something in his expression made her breath catch. It was not just appreciation of her appearance, though she saw that too. It was something softer, more wondering, as if he could not quite believe she was real. "You look beautiful," he said simply. Thank you," she managed, and was relieved when the words came out without too much struggle. They walked together to the small white church at the end of Main Street. The preacher was a thin man with spectacles and a kind face. His wife served as witness, along with Mrs. Patterson, who had insisted on coming. The ceremony was brief. Caroline stumbled over the words "I do," turning them into "I do." But Quinton waited patiently, and when it was his turn, he spoke his vows clearly and slowly, as if he wanted her to hear every word. When the preacher pronounced them husband and wife, Quinton leaned down and kissed her gently on the forehead, a gesture so tender and respectful that Caroline felt tears prick her eyes. She was married. This quiet cowboy was now her husband, and she was standing in a church in Idaho territory, further from Boston than she had ever imagined traveling, bound to a man she had known for less than 2 hours. After the ceremony, Mrs. Patterson insisted they come back to the boarding house for supper. She had prepared a feast of fried chicken, mashed potatoes, green beans, and apple pie, and she served them in her private dining room with lace curtains and good china. Caroline ate slowly, acutely aware of Quinton sitting across from her. He ate with careful manners, using his napkin, not talking with his mouth full, occasionally asking her questions that required only yes or no answers, as if he understood that speaking was difficult for her. "You like to ride horses?" he asked at one point. Caroline nodded. She had not ridden in years, but as a child, she had loved the horses at her uncle's farm. "Good. The ranch is too far to walk to town regularly. I will teach you to handle the mare I have. Her name is Daisy, and she is gentle." After supper, as the sun began to set and paint the sky in shades of orange and pink, Quinton stood and offered his hand. "We should head to the ranch. It is a long ride, but the weather is clear." Caroline felt a flutter of nervousness. The ranch, their home, where they would be alone together, husband and wife. Mrs. Patterson must have seen something in her face because she patted Caroline's hand and whispered, "Quinton is a good man. He will be patient with you." They thanked Mrs. Patterson and walked to where Quinton had left his wagon. It was a sturdy buckboard with 2 horses hitched to it, and he helped her up onto the seat before climbing up beside her. Her trunk and carpet bag were already loaded in the back. He took up the reins, and they headed out of town as the first stars began to appear in the darkening sky. The road was rough, winding through sagebrush and scrub, with the distant mountains rising like dark shadows against the horizon. Quinton did not try to make conversation, and Caroline was grateful for the silence. She was exhausted, overwhelmed, and her mind was spinning with everything that had happened. This morning, she had been a single woman on a stagecoach. Now she was Mrs. Quinton Norris, a married woman heading to a ranch she had never seen. "I should tell you about the ranch," Quinton said after a while, his voice quiet in the darkness. "It is not much yet. I have been working it for 4 years, since I was 22, saving everything I could. I have about 200 head of cattle, some horses, chickens, a milk cow. The house is small, just 2 rooms right now, but it is solid. I built it myself. I am adding on another room, which I hope will be finished before winter." He paused, and she could hear him take a breath. "I know this is not what you might have hoped for. I know you came from a city, from a life that was probably easier than what I can offer. But I promise I will work hard to give you a good life." Caroline turned to look at him in the darkness. She could just make out his profile, the strong line of his jaw, the way he held himself straight despite the long day. She wanted to tell him that she had no illusions about an easy life, that Boston had not been kind to her after her parents died, that she was grateful for this chance. Instead, she reached out and touched his arm just briefly and hoped he understood. He glanced at her, and even in the darkness, she could see him smile. "We will figure it out together," he said. It was nearly 9 o'clock when they finally turned off the main road onto a narrow track that climbed a gentle rise. At the top, Quinton pulled the horses to a stop and pointed. "There. That is home." Caroline looked where he indicated and saw a small cabin silhouetted against the starlit sky. Light glowed from one window, and she could make out the shapes of outbuildings, a barn, corrals. It was isolated, far from any neighbors, surrounded by vast darkness, but something about it made her heart lift. It looked solid, permanent, real. Quinton drove the wagon down to the cabin and helped her climb down. Her legs were stiff from the long ride, and she stumbled slightly. He caught her elbow, steadying her, and then led her to the door. Inside, a fire burned in a stone fireplace, and she saw that he had been here earlier, preparing. The cabin was indeed small, with a main room that served as kitchen and living area, and a door that must lead to the bedroom. The furniture was simple but well made: a table and chairs, a rocking chair by the fire, shelves with dishes and supplies. Everything was clean and orderly, the floor swept, the windows covered with simple curtains. "I know it is not fancy," Quinton said, watching her look around, "but it is warm and dry, and it is ours." "It is lovely," Caroline said, and meant it. He looked relieved. "Are you hungry? Thirsty?" "I can make coffee, or there is water from the well." She shook her head. "I am just tired." "Of course." He gestured to the bedroom door. "I put your things in there earlier. I will sleep out here tonight, give you some privacy. You should rest." Caroline felt a confusing mix of relief and disappointment. She knew what was expected of married couples, but she was grateful he was not rushing her, not demanding anything on this first overwhelming night. She nodded and moved toward the bedroom door. "Caroline," he said, and she turned back. "I am glad you are here. I am glad you came." She smiled at him, a real smile that she felt all the way through her exhausted body, and then slipped into the bedroom and closed the door. The room was small but cozy, with a bed covered in quilts, a dresser, a washstand with a pitcher and basin. Her trunk sat at the foot of the bed. She changed into her nightgown and washed her face, and then climbed between the sheets. The bed smelled of fresh air and pine, and the quilts were heavy and warm. Through the door, she could hear Quinton moving around quietly, banking the fire, settling in for the night. She closed her eyes and thought about the strange path that had brought her here. If her parents had not died, if she had not been left alone, if she had not answered that advertisement, she would not be lying in this bed in Idaho territory, married to a quiet cowboy who said he would wait for her words. She did not know yet if this was a blessing or simply another kind of loneliness, but she was too tired to figure it out tonight. Sleep claimed her within minutes. She woke to the sound of roosters crowing and sunlight streaming through the window. For a moment she was disoriented, unsure where she was, and then memory returned in a rush. The ranch, Quinton, marriage. She sat up and looked around the room in the morning light. It was plain but comfortable, and through the window she could see rolling hills dotted with cattle and the mountains rising in the distance. She dressed quickly in her simplest dress and combed her hair, then opened the door to the main room. Quinton was at the stove, and the smell of coffee and bacon filled the cabin. He turned when he heard her, and she saw that he was already dressed for work, his shirt sleeves rolled up, his hair still damp. "Good morning," he said. "I hope I did not wake you." "I tried to be quiet, but ranch work starts early." Good morning," she replied. "I should have been up to make breakfast." He shook his head. "Not your first morning here. Come sit. Eat." He served her coffee, bacon, and eggs and sat down across from her. They ate in comfortable silence, and Caroline found herself stealing glances at him. In the daylight, she could see the fine lines around his eyes, the stubble on his jaw, the way his hands moved with competent efficiency. He caught her looking once and smiled, and she felt herself blush. After breakfast, he pushed back from the table. "I have work to do in the barn and out on the range. I will show you around first, introduce you to everything, and then you can decide what you want to tackle today. The chickens need feeding, the eggs need collecting, and if you feel up to it, there is mending that needs doing. But do not push yourself too hard. You just got here." He took her outside, and she got her first real look at the ranch in daylight. The cabin sat on a slight rise, with a barn and several outbuildings below. Corrals held horses and a few cattle. Chickens scratched in the yard. Beyond, the land rolled away in gentle slopes covered with grass and sagebrush, and in the distance she could see the mountains, their peaks already dusted with early snow. Quinton walked her through everything patiently, showing her where the chicken feed was kept, how to collect eggs without startling the hens, where the well was, where he stored tools and supplies. He introduced her to the animals, including Daisy, the gentle mare he had mentioned, who nuzzled Caroline's hand looking for treats. "She likes you," Quinton said, sounding pleased. "That is good. Tomorrow, if you feel ready, I will give you a riding lesson. For today, just get used to the place. I will be back around midday to check on you, and I will be home before dark." He saddled his horse, a big roan gelding named Chief, and rode out toward the cattle grazing on the far hills. Caroline watched him go, his figure growing smaller against the vast landscape, and then turned to look at her new home. It was so different from Boston, from the narrow streets and brick buildings, from the constant noise and crowds. Here, the silence was profound, broken only by the wind and the chickens and the distant lowing of cattle. It should have been lonely, but instead, it felt like she could breathe for the first time in years. She spent the morning exploring, getting used to the rhythm of the place. She fed the chickens and collected eggs, delighting in the warm weight of them in her basket. She found the garden plot behind the cabin, already harvested for the year, but showing signs of careful tending. She discovered that Quinton had stocked the cabin well, with flour and sugar, coffee and salt, dried beans and preserved vegetables. He had been preparing for her arrival, making sure she would have everything she needed. Around midday, as he had promised, Quinton rode back in. He dismounted and came to where she was hanging dish towels to dry in the sun. "How are you doing?" he asked. "Gee, good," she said. "I see collected the eggs and tea tidied the cabin. You did not have to do that. I clean up after myself." "IW wanted to help," he nodded, accepting this. "Are you hungry? I can make something quick." "I am made sandwiches," she said, gesturing toward the cabin. "And lemonade. Mrs. Patterson G. gave me lemons." Something in his face softened. "That sounds perfect." They ate together on the porch, sitting on the steps in the warm September sun. Quinton told her about the cattle he had been checking, about the fence line that needed mending, about his plans for the winter. He talked easily, not requiring much response from her, but always pausing to listen when she did speak, never rushing her or showing impatience. After lunch, he mounted Chief again and tipped his hat to her. "I will be back before supper. If you need anything, fire 3 shots from the rifle over the door. I will hear it and come running." "I will be fine," she assured him, and she was. The afternoon passed peacefully as she worked her way through the basket of mending she had found. Quinton's shirts and socks showed the wear of hard work, but they were good quality, and she took satisfaction in making neat repairs. As she sewed, she thought about her new life, about this quiet man who had married her, about the vast land stretching in all directions. She had been afraid that marriage would be like it had been in Boston, that Quinton would grow impatient with her stutter, that he would start avoiding conversation with her, that she would become a source of frustration or embarrassment. But so far, he had been nothing but patient and kind. He listened when she spoke, really listened, his full attention on her face, waiting for her words without hurrying her. It was such a small thing, but it meant everything. As the sun began to sink toward the mountains, painting the sky in brilliant oranges and golds, she heard hoofbeats and saw Quinton riding back. He took care of Chief first, rubbing him down and giving him feed and water, and then came to the cabin. He was dusty and tired, but he smiled when he saw her. "Something smells good," he said. She had found a ham in the cold cellar and had made dinner with the eggs and some potatoes, simple but hearty. They ate together as the light faded, and then Quinton lit the lamps and sat by the fire to read while she continued her mending. It felt strangely domestic, comfortable, as if they had been married for years instead of one day. When she finally set aside the mending basket, Quinton looked up from his book. "Caroline, we should talk about sleeping arrangements." Her heart began to pound, but he continued in that same calm, gentle voice. "I know we barely know each other. I do not want you to feel pressured or uncomfortable. I am happy to continue sleeping out here until you feel ready to share the bedroom. There is no rush." She looked at him across the lamplight, at his honest face, at the patient way he waited for her response. She thought about her fears, about what she had been told marriage would be like, and then she thought about this man who had asked nothing of her, who had only offered kindness and patience. "Why, you are my husband," she said slowly. "The B bed is big enough for both of us." "But I would like to go slow," he nodded. "That is fine. That is more than fine. Thank you for trusting me." That night they shared the bed for the first time, both in their nightclothes, a careful distance between them. Quinton fell asleep quickly, his breathing deep and even, but Caroline lay awake for a while, acutely aware of his presence beside her. It should have felt strange, but instead it felt safe. Eventually, lulled by his steady breathing and the warmth of the quilts, she drifted off to sleep. The days began to develop a rhythm. Quinton rose early and did the morning chores, often letting Caroline sleep a bit longer. They ate breakfast together, and then he headed out to work the ranch while she took care of the house and the chickens and whatever other tasks needed doing. He always came back around midday to check on her, and they ate lunch together, talking in their halting way, Quinton always patient, Caroline gradually growing more comfortable. Then he would head back out, returning at sunset for supper and a quiet evening by the fire. True to his word, Quinton began teaching her to ride Daisy. The mare was indeed gentle, and Quinton was a patient teacher, never mocking her mistakes, always encouraging her progress. At first, Caroline could only manage a slow walk around the yard, but within a week, she was riding out to the near pastures, reveling in the freedom of movement and the beauty of the land. "You are a natural," Quinton told her after one of their lessons. "Soon you will be racing me." She laughed, a sound that surprised them both because she so rarely laughed. Quinton looked at her with such warmth that she felt her cheeks heat. As September turned to October, the weather began to cool, and Quinton worked harder to prepare for winter. He finished the addition to the cabin, creating a small storage room and larder that would keep food from freezing. He repaired fence lines and moved cattle to winter pasture. He cut and stacked firewood until there was a towering pile against the cabin wall. Caroline kept pace, learning to bake bread in the cast iron stove, to preserve vegetables and fruits, to make soap and candles. Mrs. Patterson came to visit once, bringing welcome company and news from town. She was delighted with how well Caroline seemed to be settling in and told Quinton he was a lucky man. "I know," he said simply, and the look he gave Caroline made her pulse quicken. As the days passed, she found herself watching him more, noticing things. The way his shoulders moved when he worked, the way he always took his hat off when he came inside, the way he smiled when he saw her in the morning, the way his hands were so competent and strong, yet so gentle when he helped her down from Daisy or when he touched her arm to get her attention. She realized she was falling in love with him, this quiet cowboy who had married a woman with a stutter and had never once made her feel like she was less because of it. He had kept his unspoken promise. He waited for every word, and in doing so, he had given her something precious. He had given her voice value. One evening in late October, as they sat by the fire, Caroline set aside her sewing and looked at him. He was reading, as he often did in the evenings, his face relaxed and peaceful. She must have made some sound because he looked up, meeting her eyes. "Is something wrong?" he asked. She shook her head. "And no, I just wanted to thank you. Thank me, for what? F for being patient with me. F for waiting when I speak. For N not making me feel bad about my stutter." He set down his book and leaned forward, his expression serious. "Caroline, you do not need to thank me for basic human decency. Your stutter does not change who you are. You are smart and kind and hardworking. You are beautiful and brave. You traveled thousands of miles to marry a stranger, to build a life in a place you had never seen. That takes courage. Your words might take a little longer to come out, but they are always worth waiting for." Tears filled her eyes, and she brushed them away impatiently. "I had never thought anyone would see it that way. Then everyone else was a fool." He stood and came to sit beside her on the sofa. "May I tell you something?" She nodded. "I was nervous about answering a mail-order bride advertisement. I thought, what kind of woman would need to travel across the country to find a husband? I thought maybe something would be wrong, or we would not get along, or you would hate ranch life and want to leave. But then your letters came, and they were so thoughtful and honest. You did not try to be something you were not. You told me about your parents dying, about being alone, about wanting a fresh start. That took courage too. And when you arrived and I heard your stutter, I did not think about it as a problem. I just thought about how nervous you must have been, how scared and how brave you were to be here anyway. You are not disappointed," she whispered. "Disappointed." He shook his head slowly. "Caroline, I thank God every day that you answered my advertisement. You have made this house a home. You have made my life better in every way. I know we married as strangers, but I hope we are becoming friends. And I hope someday, if you come to feel the same way, we might become more than that." She looked into his amber eyes and saw nothing but sincerity. "I think we are already more than friends," she said, her heart pounding. "I think I am falling in love with you." The words hung in the air between them, and for a moment she was terrified. What if she had misread everything? What if he did not feel the same? But then his face broke into the most beautiful smile she had ever seen, and he reached for her hand. "I am falling in love with you too," he said. "I have been falling since the day you arrived, maybe since I read your first letter. I just did not want to rush you or push you." She squeezed his hand, feeling tears of happiness now. "You see, could never push too hard. You are the kindest man I have ever known." He raised her hand to his lips and kissed her knuckles gently. "May I kiss you? A real kiss this time, not just on the forehead." In answer, she leaned toward him and he met her halfway. The kiss was soft and sweet, exploratory, both of them learning the shape and feel of each other. When they pulled apart, Caroline was breathless and blushing, but she was smiling. That night, they moved toward each other in the bed, no longer keeping a careful distance. Quinton held her, and she rested her head on his chest, listening to the steady beat of his heart. She felt safe and cherished, and when he kissed the top of her head and whispered good night, she knew she was exactly where she was supposed to be. The next weeks passed in a haze of growing affection and deepening love. They worked together, talked together, laughed together. Quinton taught her to shoot so she could protect herself if needed, and she taught him to make the apple pie Mrs. Patterson had shown her. They rode out together on crisp autumn days, exploring the edges of the ranch, and sometimes they would stop on a hilltop and just sit, watching the clouds move across the sky, comfortable in silence or in conversation. One afternoon in early November, Quinton came back early from checking the herds. Caroline was kneading bread dough, and she looked up in surprise when she heard him come in. "Is everything all right?" she asked, only stumbling slightly over the words. Her stutter had actually improved since coming to the ranch, as if the peace and acceptance she found here had loosened the knots in her tongue. "Everything is fine," he said. "I just wanted to come back and ask you something." He looked nervous, which was unusual for him. He was always so calm and steady. Caroline wiped her hands on her apron and waited. "We have been married almost 2 months now," he said. "And I know we got married for practical reasons through an advertisement between strangers, but it does not feel like that anymore. Not to me. You are not just my wife in name. You are my partner, my friend, my love. I want this to be a real marriage in every way if you want that too." Caroline felt her cheeks flush, but she met his eyes steadily. "I want that too," she said. "I love you, Quinton. I want to be your wife in every way." He crossed the room in 3 strides and pulled her into his arms, kissing her with a passion that took her breath away. The bread dough was forgotten as they made their way to the bedroom, closing the door on the afternoon light, and finally becoming husband and wife in truth as well as in name. Afterwards, lying in the tangle of quilts with Quinton's arm around her and her head on his shoulder, Caroline felt a completeness she had never known. "I had never thought I would be this happy," she whispered. "Neither did I," he replied, his fingers tracing gentle patterns on her arm. "I thought I would always be alone. I thought the ranch would be my whole life, but you have given me so much more. You gave me a more too. You gave me a voice. You listened when no one else would." He turned to look at her, his eyes serious. "I will always listen. No matter how long it takes, no matter what you need to say, I will always wait for every word." She kissed him then, pouring all her love and gratitude into the gesture, and he responded in kind. Winter came to the Idaho territory with snow and biting wind, but inside the cabin, there was warmth and love. Quinton and Caroline settled into their life together, working side by side to care for the ranch and the animals, spending long evenings by the fire, learning each other's stories and dreams. Caroline told him about her childhood in Boston, about her parents and the happy years before they died. Quinton told her about growing up on a farm in Missouri, about his parents who were still alive but whom he rarely saw, about his dream of building something that was entirely his own. Christmas came, and they celebrated quietly, just the two of them. Quinton gave Caroline a beautiful shawl he had ordered from a catalog, and she gave him a shirt she had sewn from fabric she had bought on one of their rare trips to town. They cooked a goose and made a plum pudding, and after dinner, Quinton pulled her into his arms and danced with her to no music but the wind outside. "This is the best Christmas I have ever had," he told her. "Mine too," she agreed, and it was true. As winter deepened, life on the ranch became more challenging. The cattle needed extra feed, and Quinton spent long days breaking ice on the water troughs and checking to make sure none of the animals were in distress. One night in January, a terrible storm blew in and Quinton did not come back at his usual time. Caroline waited by the fire, anxiety growing, until finally she saw lamplight approaching through the swirling snow. He stumbled in, covered in ice and snow, shaking with cold. "3 cows were caught in a draw," he said through chattering teeth. "I had to get them out." Caroline sprang into action, helping him out of his frozen clothes, wrapping him in blankets, making him hot coffee and soup. She rubbed feeling back into his hands and feet, and when he finally stopped shaking, she held him close by the fire. "You scared me," she said, and there was no stutter at all. The fear had burned it away. "I am sorry," he said, "but I could not leave them. They would have died." "I know. But you are more important than cows. Promise me you will be careful." "I promise," he said, and kissed her forehead. That night she held him extra close in bed, grateful that he was safe, and he held her just as tightly as if she were his anchor in the storm. February brought a break in the weather, and on Valentine's Day, Quinton surprised her by taking her to town. Boise was bustling despite the cold, and they walked the main street together, Quinton's arm around her waist. He bought her chocolates from the general store and a book of poetry she had admired. They had lunch at the hotel dining room, a rare extravagance, and afterwards they stopped by Mrs. Patterson's boarding house. The older woman was delighted to see them and insisted they come in for tea. She fussed over Caroline, saying how well she looked, how the ranch life clearly agreed with her. "And you two are so clearly in love," Mrs. Patterson said with satisfaction. "I knew Quinton would be a good husband, but I was not sure about the mail-order bride arrangement. I am so happy I was wrong to worry." "So am I," Caroline said, smiling at Quinton. Her stutter was almost entirely gone when she was relaxed and happy, which was most of the time now. On the ride home, as the sun set and painted the snow-covered landscape in shades of pink and gold, Quinton said, "I have been thinking about something." "What?" Caroline asked, snuggled against his side for warmth. "About expanding the herd, maybe buying the adjoining property. Old Mr. Simmons wants to sell, and his land connects to ours. It would almost double our range. Could we afford it? Not all at once, but I think we could work out payments. It would mean working harder, being even more careful with money. But it would also mean building something bigger, something to pass on to our children someday." Caroline felt a flutter in her chest at the mention of children. They had not talked about it directly, though they both knew it was a possibility now that their marriage was fully realized. "I think we should do it," she said. "I think we should build something big and lasting." He smiled and kissed the top of her head. "Then we will." Spring came slowly to the Idaho territory, the snow melting in patches, the grass gradually turning green. The cattle that had survived the winter looked thin but healthy, and new calves were born almost daily. Quinton worked from dawn to dusk, and Caroline worked alongside him when she could, helping with the calving, tending to the orphaned calves that needed bottle feeding, keeping the house running smoothly. In April, Quinton finalized the purchase of Mr. Simmons' property, and they celebrated by riding out to see the new boundaries of their ranch. Standing on a hilltop overlooking the combined land, with the wind blowing Caroline's hair and the sky stretching endlessly above them, Quinton turned to her and said, "This is ours, all of it. We did this together." "We did," she agreed, feeling a swell of pride and accomplishment. That night, as they lay in bed, Caroline took Quinton's hand and placed it on her stomach. "I have something to tell you," she said, and her voice was steady and clear. "I think I am going to have a baby." He went very still, and then he propped himself up on his elbow to look at her in the lamplight. "Are you sure?" "Pretty sure. I have not had my monthly courses in 2 months, and I have been feeling sick in the mornings. Mrs. Patterson told me once what the signs were." A slow smile spread across his face, growing until he was grinning like a boy. "A baby, we are going to have a baby. Are you happy?" she asked, suddenly nervous. "Happy, Caroline, I am beyond happy. I am ecstatic. I am going to be a father. You are going to be a mother. We are going to be a family." He kissed her then, long and deep, and when they finally pulled apart, they were both laughing and crying at once. "I love you," he said. "I love you so much." "I love you too," she replied, and there was not even a hint of a stutter. "I love you, and I love our life, and I love this baby we made together." The pregnancy progressed smoothly through the spring and summer. As Caroline's belly grew, Quinton became increasingly protective, insisting she not lift anything heavy, not work too hard, rest more. She found it both frustrating and endearing. He brought her wildflowers he found on his rides. He rubbed her aching back in the evenings. He talked to her belly, telling their unborn child stories about the ranch and the animals and the adventures they would have. In August, when the heat was oppressive and Caroline was large and uncomfortable, Mrs. Patterson came to stay at the ranch for a few weeks. She had delivered many babies in her time, and she wanted to be there when Caroline's time came. Her presence was comforting, and she kept Caroline company while Quinton worked, telling her stories and teaching her things about babies that her own mother had never had the chance to share. On a hot afternoon in late August, Caroline's labor began. Mrs. Patterson took charge immediately, sending Quinton to boil water and gather clean linens, though mostly she seemed to be giving him tasks to keep him busy. The labor was long and difficult, lasting through the afternoon and into the night. Quinton stayed close, holding Caroline's hand, wiping her forehead with cool cloths, murmuring encouragements. "You can do this," he told her. "You are the strongest person I know." Finally, as dawn was breaking, their son was born. He came into the world with a lusty cry, and Mrs. Patterson cleaned him up and placed him in Caroline's arms. "A healthy boy," she announced, "perfect in every way." Quinton sat on the edge of the bed, staring at the tiny person in Caroline's arms with awe. "He is beautiful," he whispered. "He looks like you." "He has your eyes," Caroline said, exhausted but glowing with joy. They named him Thomas after Caroline's father, and he became the center of their world. Quinton was a devoted father, helping with the baby whenever he was not working, holding him in the evenings, singing to him in a low, gentle voice. Caroline had worried that motherhood might be overwhelming, but she found it came naturally, and her stutter, which had already improved so much, seemed to disappear almost entirely in the presence of her son. "I think it is because I am not nervous anymore," she told Quinton one evening as they sat together, watching Thomas sleep in his cradle. "I spent so many years afraid of what people would think, afraid I would not be able to say what I needed to say. But here, with you, I am not afraid. I know you will always listen, always wait, and that has given me confidence." "You were always confident," Quinton said. "You just needed to be in a place where you could let it show." As Thomas grew from an infant to a baby who smiled and laughed and eventually crawled, the ranch prospered. The expanded range allowed them to increase their herd, and Quinton hired a young man named Jack to help with the work. Caroline tended a large garden, preserving vegetables and fruits for the winter, and she also began to sew for other families in the area, earning a little extra money. On their first wedding anniversary in September, Quinton took Caroline and Thomas into town for a celebration. They had dinner at the hotel, and afterwards, they walked down Main Street, Thomas balanced on Quinton's shoulders. People greeted them warmly, and Caroline realized with a start that she had become part of this community. She was not the awkward mail-order bride with a stutter anymore. She was Mrs. Norris, the rancher's wife, Thomas's mother, a woman who belonged. That night, after they had returned to the ranch and put Thomas to bed, Quinton gave her a gift. It was a journal, bound in leather with her initials embossed on the cover. "I thought you might like to write down your thoughts," he said. "You write so beautifully in your letters. I thought you might enjoy having a place to write for yourself." She was touched by the thoughtfulness of the gift. "Thank you. This is perfect." "Thank you for the best year of my life," he said, pulling her into his arms. "Thank you for taking a chance on a stranger, for coming all this way, for building this life with me." "Thank you for waiting for my words," she replied, kissing him. "Thank you for loving me exactly as I am." The years that followed were full and rich. They had a daughter 2 years after Thomas, a little girl they named Rose, who had Caroline's blonde hair and Quinton's amber eyes. 3 years after that, They had another son, Daniel, who was quieter than his siblings, but had a gentle nature that reminded Caroline of Quinton. The ranch continued to grow. With 3 children, the cabin became too small, so Quinton built an addition, creating separate bedrooms for the children and a larger kitchen and parlor. He hired more help, and eventually the Norris Ranch became one of the most successful operations in the area. But success did not change them. Quinton remained the quiet, patient man Caroline had married, devoted to his family, working hard but always making time for his wife and children. Caroline bloomed into a confident woman, her stutter now only appearing rarely, in moments of extreme stress or exhaustion. She became known in the community for her kindness, her skilled sewing, and her delicious pies. She joined the Ladies' Aid Society in Boise and made true friends for the first time since her parents had died. She never forgot, though, the young woman who had stepped off the stagecoach in September of 1882. Terrified and stuttering, hoping against hope that the stranger who had agreed to marry her would not be disappointed. She never forgot the gift Quinton had given her, the simple act of patience and acceptance that had changed her entire life. On their 10th wedding anniversary, they threw a party at the ranch, inviting neighbors and friends from town. Mrs. Patterson came, now quite elderly but still sharp as a tack, delighting in seeing how well her prediction had come true. Jack, who had been with them for years, brought his new bride. The children ran wild with the other kids, playing games in the yard while the adults ate and talked and danced to the music from the fiddle player Quinton had hired. As the sun set and people began to head home, Quinton found Caroline standing on the porch, watching their children play in the last of the daylight. He came up behind her and wrapped his arms around her waist, resting his chin on her shoulder. "Happy anniversary," he murmured. "Happy anniversary," she replied, leaning back against him. "Can you believe it has been 10 years? Sometimes it feels like yesterday. Sometimes it feels like you have always been here." She turned in his arms to face him. "I love you, Quinton. I love the life we have built. I love our children. I love this ranch. I love everything we are together." "I love you too," he said. "I cannot imagine my life without you. You are everything to me." They kissed as the stars began to appear in the darkening sky, and Caroline thought about how far she had come from that scared girl on the stagecoach. She had found her home, her family, her voice and her love, all in this wild and beautiful place, with this quiet cowboy who had promised to wait for every word and who had kept that promise every single day. As the years continued to pass, their love only deepened. They weathered droughts and hard winters, the challenges of raising children, the joys and sorrows that came with life. Thomas grew into a young man who wanted to run the ranch someday. Rose became interested in teaching and talked about going to the normal school in Boise. Daniel discovered a talent for working with horses and spent hours training them with a patience he had inherited from his father. Quinton's hair began to gray at the temples, and lines deepened around his eyes, but to Caroline, he was as handsome as the day she had met him. Her blonde hair picked up threads of silver, and her hands showed the work of years, but Quinton still looked at her as if she was the most beautiful woman in the world. On a crisp autumn afternoon when Caroline was 40 and Quinton was 45, they rode out together to the hilltop where they had stood all those years ago when they had bought the additional property. The ranch stretched out below them, prosperous and beautiful, with cattle dotting the hills and the buildings they had added over the years forming a small compound. "We did well, did we not?" Quinton said, his arm around her shoulders. "We did," Caroline agreed. "Better than I ever dreamed." "I never told you this," Quinton said, "but when I placed that advertisement for a mail-order bride, I was desperate. I was lonely. I was afraid I would grow old alone, that all my work building this place would be for nothing because I would have no one to share it with. I thought I would be grateful if any woman at all answered, as long as she was kind and willing to work. He paused, and Caroline waited, knowing there was more. But then you came, he continued, and you were so much more than I had hoped for. You were beautiful and brave and smart. Your stutter did not matter to me because I could see who you really were. I could see your strength, your determination, your kindness. I fell in love with you so fast it scared me. I was afraid you would not feel the same way, that you would only ever see this as a practical arrangement. I never saw it as only practical, Caroline said softly. From the moment you waited patiently for me to say my name on that first day, I started to hope that maybe this could be more than a business transaction. And when you said you would wait for every word, even though you never said it out loud, you showed it in everything you did, I knew I had found something precious. She took his hand and squeezed it. You gave me my voice, Quinton. You gave me the confidence to speak, to be myself, to stop being afraid. And in doing that, you gave me everything else too. Love, family, home, purpose. I came here thinking I was getting a second chance at life, but what I really got was my first chance at truly living. He pulled her close and kissed her, long and deep, the way he still did after nearly 20 years of marriage. I love you, Caroline Norris, he said when they finally pulled apart. I will love you until my last breath and beyond. And I love you, she replied, and her voice was strong and clear, no stutter at all. Always and forever. They stood there on the hilltop as the sun set, wrapped in each other's arms, watching the shadows lengthen across their land. Below, they could see smoke rising from the chimney of their home, where their children were probably starting supper, waiting for them to return. It was a good life, a full life, built on patience and love and the simple act of listening. As the first stars appeared in the darkening sky, they mounted their horses and rode down toward home together, side by side, the way they had traveled through life since that September day so long ago when a stuttering mail-order bride had stepped off a stagecoach and found a quiet cowboy who said, without words but with every action, that he would wait for every word, and in that waiting would give her the world. Years later, when Caroline was in her 70s and Quinton was approaching 80, they would sit on the porch of the ranch house they had expanded so many times, watching their grandchildren play in the yard. Thomas had indeed taken over the ranch and had expanded it further. Rose had become a teacher and had married a lawyer in Boise, giving them grandchildren who visited every summer. Daniel had started his own horse training business on a portion of the ranch land, building his own house and his own dreams. Caroline's stutter had never entirely disappeared, though it only appeared now in moments of extreme emotion or when she was very tired. But it did not matter anymore. She had spent decades speaking her mind, sharing her thoughts, telling her stories. She had written in the journal Quinton had given her all those years ago, filling volume after volume with the story of their life together. She had even started writing down the story of how she had come to Idaho as a mail-order bride, thinking perhaps her grandchildren would want to know someday how their family had begun. On a warm summer evening, as the sun painted the mountains gold and the breeze carried the scent of pine and sagebrush, Quinton reached over and took Caroline's hand, his grip not as strong as it once was but still firm and sure. "You ever regret it?" he asked. "Answering that advertisement? Coming all this way to marry a stranger?" Caroline looked at him, at his weathered face and silver hair, at the eyes that still looked at her with the same love and patience they had shown on that first day nearly 40 years ago. She thought about everything they had built together, the children and grandchildren, the ranch that had grown from a small homestead to a legacy, the love that had only deepened with time. "Not for a single moment," she said clearly. "It was the best decision I ever made. You were worth every mile of that journey, Quinton. You were worth everything." He smiled, that slow, gentle smile that still made her heart skip a beat. "I was just thinking the same thing about you." They sat together in comfortable silence as the stars began to appear, their hands linked, their lives intertwined completely. From inside the house came the sounds of their family, grandchildren laughing, adult children talking, the clatter of dishes being prepared for supper. It was the sound of life, of continuity, of love passed down through generations. "Thank you," Caroline said suddenly. "For what?" Quinton asked. "For waiting for every word," she replied. "For all these years, you never once made me feel less than whole. You never once showed impatience or frustration. You waited for my words, and in doing that, you taught me that my words had value, that I had value." "You always had value," he said. "I just helped you see it. And I love you for that," she said. "I love you for that and for 1,000 other things. I love you for being the man you are, for building this life with me, for giving me everything I never knew I needed." "I love you too," he said. "I loved you from the moment you stepped off that stagecoach, stumbling over your words but standing tall and brave anyway. I loved you through every moment of our life together, and I will love you through whatever time we have left and into eternity beyond." As the last light faded from the sky and the family called them in for supper, they rose together, moving slowly but still moving together, still side by side. They walked into the house filled with their children and grandchildren, into the warmth and light and love they had created together. And later that night, lying in the bed they had shared for nearly 40 years, Caroline nestled against Quinton's shoulder the way she had on their wedding night and every night since. His arm came around her automatically, holding her close, and she felt the steady beat of his heart beneath her cheek. "Good night, my love," he whispered, pressing a kiss to her forehead. "Good night," she replied, her voice soft and peaceful. She closed her eyes, surrounded by the scent of him, the warmth of him, the steady presence that had been her anchor for 4 decades. She thought about the scared young woman she had been, alone in Boston, answering an advertisement from a stranger, hoping desperately for a chance at a new life. She thought about how terrified she had been that her stutter would make him reject her, that she would be a disappointment, that she would be alone again. She thought about how wrong she had been, how Quinton had not just accepted her but had cherished her, had not just tolerated her stutter but had transformed it from a source of shame into simply another part of who she was, no more significant than the color of her eyes or the way she laughed. She thought about their children and grandchildren, about the ranch that would continue through the generations, about the love story that had begun with a newspaper advertisement and a stagecoach ride, and had blossomed into something beautiful and lasting. As sleep began to claim her, she smiled against Quinton's shoulder. She had come to Idaho territory as a mail-order bride with a stutter, frightened and uncertain. She had found a quiet cowboy who had said, without words but through every action, that he would wait for every word. And in that waiting, in that patience and acceptance and love, she had found everything. She had found home. She had found family. She had found herself. Most of all, she had found a love that would last forever, a love that had transformed them both, a love that had built something beautiful and lasting in the wild western landscape. And as she drifted off to sleep in the arms of the man who had waited for every word and had loved her through every moment, Caroline knew with absolute certainty that she had lived a good life, a full life, a life rich with love and purpose and joy. The stuttering mail-order bride and the quiet cowboy had created something remarkable together, and their story would live on in their children and grandchildren, and in the land they had built together. It was a perfect ending to a perfect love story, proof that sometimes the most unexpected beginnings lead to the most beautiful destinations, and that true love is found not in grand gestures but in small moments of patience, kindness, and acceptance. In the quiet act of waiting for every word, Quinton had given Caroline the greatest gift of all, the freedom to be herself, the confidence to use her voice, and the knowledge that she was loved exactly as she was. And that, Caroline thought as sleep finally claimed her, was worth more than all the eloquent speeches in the world, worth more than perfect words spoken without hesitation, because the words she and Quinton had shared, however long they took to emerge, had been real and true and filled with love. And in the end, that was all that really mattered. The story of Caroline and Quinton Norris became something of a legend in Boise and the surrounding territory. People spoke of the mail-order bride who had come with a stutter and the patient cowboy who had loved her exactly as she was. Their marriage was held up as an example of what partnership should be, of how love grows not just from passion, but from respect and patience and genuine acceptance. When Quinton passed away peacefully in his sleep at the age of 83, Caroline was beside him as she had been every night for 42 years. Their children and grandchildren gathered for the funeral, and the entire community turned out to pay respects to the man who had built one of the finest ranches in Idaho and who had been known throughout his life as a man of integrity and kindness. Caroline stood at his grave with tears streaming down her face, but she did not stutter when she spoke the words she had prepared. "He was the best man I ever knew," she said clearly. "He taught me that words do not have to come quickly to have value, that patience is a form of love, and that acceptance is the greatest gift one person can give another. He was my husband, my partner, my love, and my best friend, and I will carry him in my heart until we meet again." She lived for 5 more years after Quinton's death, surrounded by her family, still living in the ranch house they had built together. She spent her days working in her garden, playing with her great-grandchildren, and writing in her journals, documenting the full story of her life for future generations. On a cool autumn evening, as September painted the world in shades of gold and the mountains stood sharp against the darkening sky, Caroline sat in her rocking chair on the porch, wrapped in the shawl Quinton had given her so many Christmases ago. She was looking out over the land they had built together when she felt a sudden peace wash over her. She closed her eyes and thought she heard Quinton's voice, as clear as if he were standing beside her. "I have been waiting for you," he seemed to say. "Take your time. I will wait for every word just like always." She smiled and whispered, "I am coming." And as the sun set on that September evening, Caroline Andrews Norris passed peacefully, her life complete, her story finished. She had been a mail-order bride who came with a stutter, and she had found a quiet cowboy who had said he would wait for every word. Together, they had built a life of love and purpose, proving that the best love stories are not the ones that start perfectly, but the ones that grow through patience, acceptance, and unwavering devotion. Their descendants continued to work the ranch for generations, always remembering the story of Caroline and Quinton, the unlikely couple whose love had founded a legacy. The journals Caroline had kept were passed down through the family, treasured for their honest account of life in the Idaho territory and for the love story they told. And sometimes, on cool autumn evenings when the wind whispered through the pines and the mountains stood stark against the sky, people claimed they could see 2 figures standing on the hilltop overlooking the ranch, hand in hand, looking out over the land they had built together. It was Caroline and Quinton, forever together, forever in love, a testament to the power of patience, acceptance, and the simple act of waiting for every word. Their love story became more than just family legend. It was written about in local histories, included in books about the settling of Idaho, told and retold as an example of how love can flourish in the most unexpected ways. Schools used Caroline's story to teach children about perseverance and self-acceptance. Marriage counselors pointed to Quinton's patience as an example of what true partnership looks like. But beyond all the lessons and legends, the truth remained simple. A stuttering young woman had taken a chance on a stranger, traveling thousands of miles to marry a man she had never met. And that man had given her the gift of patience, of acceptance, of love. Together, they had built something beautiful that lasted not just their lifetimes but generations beyond. It was a love story worthy of the Wild West, set against the backdrop of Idaho's rugged beauty, filled with hardship and triumph, challenge and joy. But at its heart, it was simply the story of two people who found each other against all odds and who chose, every single day, to love each other well. And that, in the end, was the greatest triumph of all.